So I'd like to introduce you to our speaker now. It's Dave Winnard, who runs Discover the Wild, which is a local natural history company which focuses on species identification and foraging. There's Dave. Hello, Dave. Dave, as you'll see, as soon as he starts showing his photos, is a really accomplished wildlife photographer. And as well as that, he's written for many nature magazines, such as Birdwatching, and he's appeared, I think, on TV and radio. That's right, isn't it, Dave?
Yep.
Including
not just Crime Watch either.
Crime Watch, yes. Crime Watch, Autumn Watch, all those nature programmes. So we've been really lucky to benefit from Dave's expertise and enthusiasm here at the Wildlife Trust in Lancashire. I know you've run events at Brockholes, haven't you? And in the carbon landscape around Wigan and on some other reserves as well. So without further ado, over to you, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you all. Ali, are we doing the poll?
Yes. So you will see that Dave is currently sharing his screen, and you can see a mystery thing here. So I'm going to launch the poll now, and can you tell us what you think made this?
It's to assess how clever everyone is. That's all it is. There's no right or wrong answers. There is a very wrong. There's lots of wrong answers. Actually, there's only one right answer.
That's right.
We'll give you a few seconds just to decide what you think it is, and then I'll reveal the answer.
So yeah, you should see the poll on your screen now. So do vote. Do have a guess if you just don't know.
Yeah.
But
you won't
maybe
be named and shamed.
Or will you? Okay, I'll just wait for a few more people to vote. Go on, have a guess. All right, shall I reveal to you, Dave, that we've got a very clever bunch.
Have we?
We've got a very clever bunch with us today. So I will now reveal the answer, or I will reveal what people have said rather. So in the lead, we've got 66% of people have said that they think that it's a fungus. Then 16% voted bird's nest moth, 13% gold crest, 3% ant, and 3% have said, is it a tree slug? So Dave, can you tell us what it is, please?
I can. It's this. It's not really this. This is the bird's nest moth, but it's not that. It gets its name, bird's nest moth, because it often nests in birds' nests. So whenever you're emptying birds' nests from bird boxes and things like that at the end of the year, not while they're using it, obviously, when you're cleaning them out, you often find some of the larvae and things of little micro moths like this, but it's actually a fungus. This is the common bird's nest fungus. And it's remarkable, isn't it, how a fungus can, it's not really mimicking it, it's just pure chance that it has evolved to kind of look like something that we all think of as looks like a nest and things like that. It's actually a little cup fungus, and the little eggs, in inverted commas, they contain the spores of the fungus, which are like the seed. They, as it rains, the kind of rain droplets disperse the eggs, and they kind of land somewhere and hopefully form a new colony of itself. And on the left, you can see that's what it looks like when it starts, a little souffle. And then it opens up to reveal the eggs, and you can get loads of them. It's tiny. So I didn't put anything in for scale other than the moss that it was growing on, but that's about half the size of a 5p piece. You know, really, really small. And I bet some of you have got this in your garden. I photographed this a couple of days ago, so it's definitely out now. And it likes rotting vegetation, so you could easily find it in the garden. So over the next kind of 45 minutes or so, I do want to cover some of the obscure stuff like this. And it's easy to think that winter's kind of a bit boring for wildlife. There's lots of birds around, and we'll discuss lots of birds. But actually, all aspects of natural history are still out even in the depths of winter, even the moths. And this is one of my favorite moths. This is a December moth, appropriately named, flying now. And if you wonder how moths keep warm in winter, that's how you do it. You wear your fur coat and you keep nice and warm. And I know that this is a male. Without anything for comparison, this has to be a male. And it's because the female's flightless. So the fact that this has wings immediately tells me this has to be a male December moth. So we will cover some obscure things like this. And we'll also cover some cute and cuddly and, dare I say, boring things. Cute and cuddly. Oh, show me the weird and wacky fungi any day of the week. So I was born and raised in Rochdale. So how I got interested in natural history was through fungi. That is my specialty. The one thing in natural history that I absolutely love and adore is fungi. And it's because my grandma used to take me out into the woods when I was 5 to find mushrooms and other fungi. And she used to pay me a penny for every common species I found, 2 pennies if it was uncommon, and 5 pennies if it was rare. And at the end of the walk, we'd walk past an old-fashioned sweet shop, and with whatever I'd earned in mushrooms, I'd get in sweets. And, you know, as you can tell, I did all right. And they just got me hooked on natural history, going out and it being just this treasure hunt of going out, finding these amazing things. And then as I got older, it wasn't just mushrooms, but I developed an interest in birds and butterflies and moths, and then later plants. I can still remember being in my early teens thinking I'll never be old enough to be interested in plants. Plants are just boring. And now plants are my absolute favorite thing, really, you know, apart from mushrooms. But growing up in Greater Manchester gave me a love for urban wildlife, but also the stuff that's right on the doorstep of, you know, the urban jungle, including things like mountain hare. So it often surprises people in Greater Manchester that we do get mountain hare. But if you go to places like Dovestone over in Oldham, there's loads and loads of mountain hares, a spillover population from the Peak Districts. And although I'm not a big fan of cute, cuddly bunny things and things like that of photographing, mountain hares are quite nice. They're a challenge to photograph. They're a challenge and they're not a challenge. The challenge is finding the photographable mountain hares, because there's 2 types of mountain hare when you're photographing them. The ones that see you before you see it, and the only photographs of them you'll ever get is the arse end of a mountain hare running off into the distance. And the mountain hares that are too busy ignoring you to care what you're doing. And if you approach them really quite carefully, quietly, slowly, you can get really, really close to them and just sit with them and just be in their company and tolerate them, which is how I got this photo. And it's getting easier and easier and easier as each winter goes by to see the mountain hares up on the moors, because in winter they change their coats to white and the snow doesn't come. So then you're just left with white blobs sitting on the moors against a very dark, reddy brown heather background that become very easy to see and very uncamouflaged. And what we're noticing is that the hares are turning white later and changing back from white earlier. So their gap of when they change their color, because they go from this kind of dirty browny gray color in summer to white to be camouflaged in winter, it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, that period. And it presumably must be because it's better not to be white if your background's no longer white. We're just not getting those white Christmases anymore, are we? We just don't get the snow in the middle of winter. So mountain hares, they're wonderful. One of the things that really drove me mad with birds was my grandma took me to Leighton Moss when I was about 8 and said, find me a bittern. And I couldn't find a bittern at all. And years and years and years went by, never saw a bittern. They were mythical. Now, back in the early mid-90s, when I was going up there looking for bittern, there were so few bitterns in the UK at all. They were on the verge of extinction in the UK. There was, you know, 1 pair at Leighton Moss, handful in East Anglia. There was almost down to kind of single digits breeding in the UK. And then I remember one winter in a Wigan Flashes when I was 16, happened just to be going bird watching there. And all of a sudden this bittern flew out of the reed beds and flew around and then landed back. And that was my first ever bittern. And once I broke my duck, that's it. I've, you know, see them quite regularly now, including a few years ago at an RSP reserve down in Somerset. We saw 5 in flight together. You know, they've made a remarkable comeback. And the idea that now bittern are on the verge of breeding in Greater Manchester at places like Wigan Flashes was unthinkable back in the early 90s for me, to think that, you know, somewhere like Greater Manchester could possibly host a pair of bittern would be amazing. And, you know, they're being seen in winter more and more in Greater Manchester, and all we need is just 2 birds, both male and female. Can't be 2 males, can't be 2 females, otherwise we won't get a population that way. Just to kind of stay and breed. But winter is a great time to see bittern, especially when it goes icy, because it forces them right out of the reed bed to come and look for fish and things. So you can see in this image, the water's actually iced over, which is why it's relatively straightforward to see bittern in those kind of conditions. The only downside is sometimes you have to wait, and if it's icy cold, you need to be wrapped up warm and make sure you don't freeze while you're watching bittern. Tracks and signs are really important in looking for winter wildlife. And when I was growing up in the moors in Rochdale, this was a sign that used to get me quite excited. And it looks like someone's just got some toothpaste and just put a little dollop on the peat up on the moors above Rochdale. That little toothpaste-like line is indicative of a bird that occurs on the moors around Greater Manchester in winter. And that's this one. This is snow bunting. And once you learn that snow bunting poo is quite distinctive and doesn't look like anything else that's up there. The other thing as well is most birds leave the kind of harsh moorland when it snows and goes down to the coast. Snow buntings don't seem to mind it. In fact, the colder it gets, there seem to be more and more sightings up on the moors. They seem to be able to find food. The only downside is they're so tolerant of people, you almost have to stand on them to make them move. So you could almost walk over them and not even see them. So looking for those little signs of their toothpaste-like poo and looking on the moors can be, you know, a really worthwhile. The problem is most people don't want to go up onto the, you know, very cold wintry moors in the middle of winter, especially above Rochdale and Oldham and places like that. It's easier to go down onto the coast, and you get lots of snow buntings down on the coast as well. So this is taken on a beach over at kind of near St Anne's. So, you know, and these images of snow bunting, they're both nice. They're nothing special, but that one was carrying camera gear 3 miles over the moors in horrendous conditions, lying down and eventually getting this photograph of a snow bunting. And it's so much hard work into this. That one literally got out of the car at St Anne's, walked 5 yards and just lay down on the beach, and it was there. And it was just, there's absolutely no skill involved, which is why a lot of bird watchers like to go looking on the coast for snow bunting in winter, because they're far easier than walking on the moors. Plus, on the coast at winter, you find some amazing birds. So bar-tailed godwit is one of my favourite wading birds, for a number of reasons. One, it always looks like they're smiling because their bill turns upwards at the end. When they flock together, it's the collective noun is a prayer. It's a prayer of godwit. And also their migration is phenomenal. So bar-tailed godwits occur around the world, not just in the UK. They occur right the way around. And we get lots of them on our coasts all around the UK in the middle of winter. But where they breed up in Alaska in the summer, birds then migrate in winter down to New Zealand. And some of these birds migrate non-stop. And I think they've been radio tagging some this year, and one of them did that journey in 9 days. So literally going from Alaska to New Zealand non-stop, 9 days. That's remarkable. These birds are just fantastic migrants. And there are a number of islands in between Alaska and New Zealand, depending on which way they go. Most of the birds don't seem to want to stop. 1 or 2 do, but it seems like it's a very rare occurrence. So they're fantastic migrants. But we also get other ones. I mean, godwits are quite a large wading bird, whereas sanderling are one of our smallest. And sanderling have a weird kind of, well, up until a number of years ago, we really didn't know where they bred and where they went. They breed really, really high up in the Arctic. And then lots of them winter off our coast, but some go even further south. Some winter in Namibia, and, you know, some in kind of Portugal and Spain and Morocco. And so it's a real kind of mishmash of a migration. But they're fantastic little things, always running along the water's edge on the beach, little clockwork legs going along really, really quickly, very pale birds. This is a first year bird. Generally, adult sanderlings would be a uniform grey on the back, whereas this has got this black speckling, which tells me that when I photographed it in this winter, it was the same years, it was born the same year. So it's a youngster, that one. But they're often incredibly friendly. The great thing with working with birds that breed high up in the Arctic is they're not used to seeing people. So they've got no reason to be afraid of them and to feel like you're a threat. And especially when you're photographing them, if you lie on the beach on, you know, at ground level, they just think you're a seal, or maybe in my case, a washed up whale or whatever, but they're used to that. When you stand up, you're a real dominant figure against the skyline, and that's what they don't like. When you get down at nature's eye level, things just accept you like not. Not can be a real pain to work with, which is, it sounds mad because at the moment in the northwest along the coast, there's probably 100,000 of these birds, and they flock together in massive, massive numbers. And I seem to have done the backwards thing of, I've still not got any really nice pictures of these huge flocks of knots swirling round against a nice kind of coastal backdrop, but I've got pictures of single knots on migration that turn up on their own. So that's my homework for this winter, I think, is to try and get some beautiful pictures of flocks and flocks of knot. There are some birds though that no matter how often you see them, you can never tire of. So one of a really good place to see short-eared owls, Lunt Meadows, which is a fantastic reserve. I went for the first time last year to Lunt Meadows. It's a Lancs Wildlife Trust reserve. The Lancs Wildlife Trust haven't twisted my arm to say this. You know, I am being brutally honest. I went there because in spring last year there was a stilt sandpiper turned up, which was fantastic, and then in the autumn there was 2 American golden plover that turned up. So this little site had hosted some really rare birds last year. But in winter, it is great for short-eared owl, and short-eared owl are incredibly clever. So lots of birds that I work with, I often photograph at the nest, and in some cases that's under license. And short-eared owl, one of these birds often see what they perceive as danger, but they're not clever. So if you set up a hide at a bird in a bird's territory, if someone walks with you to the hide, the bird's wary because danger is approaching. If you get in the hide and that other person walks away, they then perceive the danger as to disappeared. They haven't worked out that the danger is still hidden away in that hide. So many birds you can trick very easily. Short-eared owls you can't. They know, they're really clued in. And actually, this wasn't at the nest. We never found the nest. We were helping to put in a nest record card for the BTO, monitoring their breeding status. And we were using the car as a hide, because that's something else you can do, is you can use the card, get the car as a mobile hide and drive around, and they see the car, but they don't really see the danger. And this short-eared owl was flying around hunting, picked up a vole, and then started flying off with it. Now, at that point, that illustrates, well, it's going to have a nest nearby and it's taking food to the nest. Bird flew over, landed in some tussocky area, flew off. 10 seconds later, no vole. It's done a food pass to the young in the nest. So we gave it a minute or two, walked on over to go and check the nest. And there in this tussock is this still warm vole that had just been killed, and the short-eared owl in the distance watching us. And it tested us. and so it knew we were interested in what it was up to. So we left it. It came back, took the vole, went to the nearest post, and kind of ate it. But then it would fly by, and it would look. When it was flying past the car, it would look in and almost look at your eyeballs and say, "I know you're there. I'm not that stupid." So I have a very, very soft spot for short-eared owls. They're fantastic, and they can be out in the middle of the day. They often say with owls' eyes, you can tell their hunting technique because yellow eyes mean they're diurnal, or certainly out more during the day, whereas tawny owls have totally black eyes because they're very nocturnal. And then things like long-eared owl have orange eyes because they're crepuscular. They're out at dawn and dusk. There's always generalizations and things. And in the UK, it kind of works. You can tell an owl's hunting technique just by looking at their eyes. And short-eared owls are definitely out more during the day than they are at night. They're wonderful to see. I love all wildlife. I know that some people will say, "Oh, magpies, horrible." Magpies in snow are just fantastic. They're just beautiful, beautiful birds. They are. They're fantastic. And I get a bad press. You know, people say, "Oh, they take chicks and things like that." So do great spotted woodpeckers. So do jays. But no one, you know, but they've got a bit of color in them. They're blue, and, you know, woodpeckers are interesting, so we'll not persecute them. You know, everything in nature's got to make a living. It's just magpies make their living very publicly and sometimes can be quite upsetting. But I like them in the garden. I like watching magpies. I think they're very clever. But then garden birds are often just really, really beautiful, aren't they? We take them for granted, and winter's a great time to get, you know, to know your garden birds. Male bullfinches, who doesn't love a male bullfinch? You know, and if you're lucky enough putting things like sunflower hearts out, you could attract bullfinches even into urban gardens. They're getting more and more common. A lot of the garden birds that, well, a lot of the birds and finch, you know, especially finches that have adapted to coming into gardens seem to be doing better than the ones that haven't. You know, goldfinch are increasing, bullfinches are increasing, whereas things like linnet and twite, which haven't mastered coming into gardens, they're in decline. But then there's some of the birds that we get in winter, vary in number depending on what's happening in Scandinavia. Brambling, a couple of them breed up in Scotland, but most of the ones we get in winter come down from Scandinavia and over from Russia and places like that. Look like a bit like a chaffinch, but much more orange in colour. If it's a really bad winter up, you know, in the Arctic Circle and around that region, we get a big influx of brambling. In some years we don't get as many, but they're wonderful to see. But my favourite bird of the garden is this, blue tits. In winter, I love watching blue tits because they're really quite friendly, they're comical, they're beautiful. I've got twitching friends that drive the length and breadth of the UK looking for things like Pallas's grasshopper warbler. Now, if you've never heard of a Pallas's grasshopper warbler, imagine the most boring, drab, brown bird you could imagine, and then make it even more boring and drab, and that's a Pallas's grasshopper warbler. And I keep saying, everyone has a sphere of twitchiness. So how far are you willing to go to twitch something? Because that's what twitchers do. You know, some people will go to the Isles of Scilly to look for things, or even up to Shetland. If blue tits didn't occur in the UK, how far would you go to see one? So let's say we don't have blue tits in the UK, one turned up at Land's End. Would you drive down to see one? You know, most of you might think probably not. If I said there's one just south of Birmingham, would you go? You know, some of you might say no. If I said there's one just on the other side of Manchester, if you're living in Manchester, would you go? You know, you might say yes. If I said there's one at the bottom of your garden, would you open the curtain windows and have a look? You know, if the answer is no, this talk's probably not for you, really. But you see what I mean? You know, there's a point where you go, I'll go and have a look at that. And if blue tits were rare, look at them. They are blue and bright yellow with a bandit eye stripe. They look like they should be in the tropics, and yet they're one of our commonest birds. So we've got to appreciate them. As with lots of other of our birds, redwing or winter thrush, which if you want to see them, go to somewhere with rowan berries or hawthorn berries. You know, so, well, in that case, you need to look for rowan and hawthorn. But at night, you can often hear redwing flying over. Probably it's getting a little late in the year now, but certainly on the run up to winter, if you're standing outside, back door, not tonight because it's horrible here, but on a nice quiet night, if you just stand outside, you often hear this zeep, zeep, flying over. And that's because redwings migrate at night, and you can often hear them flying over your house in the middle of the night. They're our smallest thrush, lovely red armpits, which is why they get their name. Not to be confused with our missel thrushes, one of my favorite birds. This time of year, they're very vocal because they're protecting their berries. So berries become such an important resource for birds because they're high in calories. They're incredibly important. Missel thrushes really do mark their trees, and they make a really clattering sound. Very pretty birds. If you've got mistletoe anywhere nearby, they like the berries of that, which is where they get their name from. They are the missel thrush from the mistletoe. But mistletoe up in the northwest isn't a common plant at all. Further south it is, and further east, but not much of it here. So one of the most impressive wildlife sightings I've had, possibly in terms of bird watching in the UK ever, was actually the other day, and it involves starling. Starling's a favorite of mine because when I was growing up, we lived in a back-to-back kind of terraced house, and the only birds we ever got in the garden were starlings. So I often have a soft spot for them for that reason. But one of the reasons I really like watching them is when they murmurate. So when they get these flocks all coming together and doing these amazing shapes and avoiding things like sparrowhawk or peregrines as they're trying to roost somewhere. The other day over on Anglesey, we estimated the flock of starlings there to be 1 million. There was 1 million starlings all coming in, swirling round, then diving into the reed bed. You know, it's when I was putting in my data into the bird app to monitor what I've seen, it's the first time I've ever written 1 million of anything, you know, let alone birds. So, I mean, you just wonder what the catchment area is, but there's loads of places around where these murmurations can happen. And sometimes it can happen in the same place, but often they move around. The thing is, if you've got 1 million birds landing on a reed bed, it flattens the reed bed. So they can't use it all the way through winter, so they'll have to go somewhere else. And there's plenty of places around. There used to be one in Rochdale, pretty much when I was growing up, and it was urban like this. They used to roost on the pylons, you know, which is fantastic because when you start looking at the pylons, you can see all the birds sat there. So yeah, at this time of the year, you know, at dusk, you can often find these big clouds of starlings flying around, and estimating them is difficult. I mean, there was a few of us estimating the flock of 1 million, and you think, well, how do you count that? And with difficulty is the answer. But you take photos and you start counting. If that's 10, that's 100. If that's 100, then that's 1,000. If that's 1,000, that's 10,000. If that's 10,000, that's 100,000. You know, so there are ways of doing it, but then you can still be out by hundreds of thousands either side. At the moment, 1 million seems to be a conservative estimate. The upper estimate's 2 million. You know, and some of these birds aren't ours. You know, rings that have been retrieved off birds. We often get birds from Lithuania. So they're coming from all over Europe, really. Sometimes they bring some of their friends as well, like waxwings. So it doesn't look like it's going to be a waxwing year this year, but never say never. When I was growing up, we used to say once every 7 years, we get an eruption of waxwings from Scandinavia. Now it's about once every 5 years. And the great thing with waxwings is they never occur in the countryside. They never occur in remote places. Supermarket car parks, housing estates, retail parks. That's the places they love, where you get planted rowan berries. And you don't just get one of these birds, you get flocks of them. In some cases, hundreds of them turning up. And they're really beautiful birds. So they're well worth keeping an eye out for. Last time I saw one was a couple of years ago at a retail park in Chester while I was doing my Christmas shopping, which then never got done because I was too busy watching the waxwing. And then this is also one of my favorite ducks, which is really beautiful in winter. We get them on the canal near us, and canals are fantastic for wildlife, really undervalued. And we often get lots of mandarins. And I can remember my grandma saying, shall we go feed the ducks? And I was never that interested. And I saw, when we went down, saw my first mandarin, and I thought, wow, we can come and feed this all the time because it's such a beautiful bird, isn't it? Not truly native, been here quite a while now, well established, but they're just fantastic and great to see in winter. As are these. So this is a species that has declined so much in my lifetime alone, and that's undergone an even more decline before I was born. Water voles, ratty. And, you know, I can remember as a kid walking along the canal and hearing the plop as the water voles jump into the water to avoid you. Now they're getting harder and harder to see. Locally, the best places to see them still are places like Astley Moss, which still have a good population of water voles. But yeah, they're getting harder and harder to see, mainly because of this. So this is mink. And mink are really active in winter. They become really easy to see, well, relatively easy. And mink, again, are another non-native species that have been released, and they're just a phenomenal predator. And water voles are one of their favorite things to eat. So mink have just gone into areas where there's water vole, and they just decimate them, just eat them all, and that's it. It's game over for the water voles. And for many, many years, certainly in inland parts of the Northwest, we used to say, oh, there's no otters, there's no otters. People were saying they were seeing otters, you know, I saw an otter, you know, it's like, you saw a mink. And for years, that was probably true. Now, otters are definitely back. You know, places like Brockles, they've been seen at you know, otters there. On the Ribble, they've been seen. Even in the middle of Manchester city centre, they have been caught on CCTV running down the middle of Deansgate in the middle of the night. You know, so otters are definitely about. And one was photographed in Salford the other day, you know, out during the day. And what's interesting is that it seems to be a correlation between otters returning and mink numbers becoming lower. And it's not sure whether otters are either out competing them for food, which seems unlikely, or otters really don't like mink in their territory and they're either killing them or just getting them out of the area. But what's happened in a few places is where otter have returned, so have water vole. So otter might be the saving grace for water vole, but we just need them to kind of hurry up and recolonize all the places they're used to. In the meantime, we have to kind of put up with having mink about, and mink will eat anything, birds' eggs, water voles, you know, they'll take, I've seen them take little grebes, you know, literally just swim along the water, find a little grebe, and then thank you very much. And no matter how hard I tried, anthropomorphizing, you can never make them not look evil. But of course they're not evil, they're just doing what they do, you know. But there's just something about mink when you look at them, they're like, Anyway, so in the middle of winter, we have our birds, we have some mammals around and things like that. We even have plants. And you know, Christmas Day, I always make sure I go for a walk because I want to see my first lesser celandine in flower. And it's a little tradition of mine. I have a few, but one of them is always making sure I see lesser celandine in flower on Christmas Day. Now, the bulk of lesser celandine is out in the spring, but you definitely get quite a few out on Christmas Day, so long as it's not under 6 foot of snow. But I can't remember the last time we had a snowy Christmas. And lesser celandine is just that plant that just warms the heart. It's that kind of sunflower yellow, just you're walking through, you know, woodlands on a grey day at Christmas, and then these bursts of little yellow stars coming from the woodland floor. They're fantastic. Now, I'm always interested in the uses and things of plants and fungi, and lots of plants have either current names or old names where they might be something wort, so lungwort, and that kind of indicates what they were used for, especially for medicines, for treating. So lungwort, the leaves look like infected lungs, therefore they will treat any lung condition. It's not true. It's just, you know, that's what people thought hundreds of years ago. And lesser celandine has the sad name of pilewort, because if you uproot it, it looks like it has piles, so therefore it will treat piles. But no one's ever managed to tell me how it would treat it. You know, I kind of think the remedy would be, you know, bend over and replant, but who knows? But anyway, when you go out at Christmas or Boxing Day walk, do have a look for this. And even sometimes snowdrops, you know, snowdrops can be out really early, and it's always a fascinating one for me, because with bird watching, there are definite things that are, you know, you count and you document, and there are things that are just what we call plastic fantastic, things that have escaped and, you know, aren't really meant to be there. And with plants, half of our flora isn't really native. So how, you know, so it's always a kind of, what do you get excited about? Snowdrops are often planted, so it's kind of hard to get excited about something that's purposely been put there. But lots of them have been long established, brought back often, but they say by the Crusades. You know, people seeing these in southeastern parts of Europe, the Carpathians and further, and then bringing them back to remind them of their travels. And then they've, you know, there are some places that have got naturalized colonies that have been there hundreds and hundreds of years. Either way, lifts the spirits, doesn't it, when you see things like this? There are some things in winter, though, that are very easy to find that you don't want to find. So this is water fern. And I know when you hear the name fern, you think of these big frondy things in the, you know, in the jungles and things like that. This is tiny. You know, most of these little fronds are smaller than my little fingernail. There's some duckweed in amongst this, so those of you that are at a pond will know how small individual duckweed leaves are. Another non-native, it's often referred to by its scientific genus, which is Azolla, and it's a problem, a really, really big problem, because it just creates huge dense carpets of this plant, and it just chokes the whole pond, the stream, whatever. It can deoxygenate it, so it's a real menace. It's a real pain to get rid of because it's really effective at spreading. It was introduced in the kind of ornamental pond kind of garden centres, things like that, and then all it needs is a bird to visit someone's pond, get it on their feet, fly off into somewhere into the wild, and that's it. It's established. And it's remarkable how many garden centres I visit where this is in, when they're selling their aquatic plants, this is present. And you just think, this is madness. You know, someone's going to buy that and it's going to end up somewhere else. But anyway, but in winter, when a lot of the other pond vegetation and water vegetation has died back, it's often very easy to see. And often it turns red as well. Different times of the year it does that. And it can be a really, really spectacular species. So one definitely in winter to have a look for. This is a species I get asked a lot about, with dictating climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it. People saying the hazel catkins are out now. It seems early. I've seen my first hazel in flower already this year. Now, depends how you want to categorize it. Either hazel flowers very early or it flowers very late. You know, it depends what the cutoff is, you know. But often November, you start seeing the catkins, and then through December, January, you'll start seeing them in flower. February, they'll definitely be out in flower. And these are the male flowers. The female flowers are tiny and bright pink. I don't think I've got a photo of one. Something else I need to do for this year. Often surprising when you start talking about plants and things and having male flowers and female flowers, and it gets even more complicated with certain trees, because you can have male trees and female trees, let alone flowers on the same tree. But hazel's fantastic to look for. Great for early pollinators as well, coming out early in the year. Bees and things that just happen to come out on those nice kind of warmish, wintry January, February days. So it's great to learn. If you want to learn your trees in winter, it's often easier than in summer, I think anyway. For those of you that are interested, the terminal buds of trees are very, very different from each other. So if you look down, find a little branch, find the very end bud, and you can compare them to these. Little bit of self-promotion. This is on my website, Discover the Wild. You can download it for free. I'm not after any money from anyone. And you can print it up to A3. And if you go out and you want to learn your tree ID in winter, then you can use this. No doubt you'll find a species that isn't on this sheet. There's hundreds of different varieties of trees, especially in urban areas where they often get planted. But these are the main kind of species you're going to find, especially in somewhere like Greater Manchester. So everyone should know their tree buds. Everyone should know how to identify trees full stop, because there's nothing worse than going bird watching with bird watchers and someone saying, oh, it's in that tree. And it's like, well, which tree? Is it in the ash? Is it in the sycamore? Narrow it down. And in some cases, knowing your trees can be critical for fungi. So we'll kind of finish up talking about some of the fungi you can find at this time of the year. And in some cases, they can be very host specific. Others are just habitat specific. So this is something to look for now in your garden. This is red lead roundhead. If you're using wood chip or mulch, there are certain fungi that have adapted to really liking that kind of medium. In the wild, wood chip doesn't really exist except for where maybe you have beavers. You know, you kind of get that wood chip at the base of trees there. But other than that, we've kind of created this artificial habitat of putting in playgrounds, in our flower beds and things like that. And over the last 30, 40 years of using it, some fungi have adapted and spread very, very quickly into using it. And now lots of people get this species, the red lead roundhead, growing on their wood chip in their garden. It's a really, really pretty species. And sometimes you can get really unusual things. So this is something hot off the press I photographed a couple of days ago. This is the magenta rustgill. I'm photographing it on white backgrounds because I'm doing a book, not promoting it because I don't know, it's going to be years until it's done anyway. But one of the reasons is you can compare species very easily on white backgrounds when you put them next to each other. The magenta rustgill is rare, but it likes wood chip where it's warm. So if you've used wood chip in a greenhouse, there's a good chance it'll appear. Now, often people see mushrooms and think, oh, poisonous, get rid of them, you know, horrible things. But actually, they're fantastic and usually very good for the ecosystem. In fact, I could go off on a tangent and say that without fungi, the rest of the ecosystems would come tumbling down anyway. And without fungi, the whole world would just cease to exist. But we'll leave that for another day. And this is the great thing with looking for fungi is you could genuinely find something rare in your garden. You know, going out bird watching, finding a rare bird is quite difficult because you'd have to get up earlier than other bird watchers and you'd have to go to sites where there's rarities likely to turn up. Whereas with fungi, there are so few people looking and documenting these things that actually finding a new county record, a new country record, even a new species science is actually quite easy. And some species are just found in people's gardens and we just don't know they're there yet because people just see them and think, oh, just get rid of them. But that's my favorite thing at the moment, because often I get asked, what's your favorite species? And my answer is whatever I've just photographed, because it's something new, it's exotic, it's, you know. So the magenta rustgill is definitely my favorite thing at the moment, until it gets replaced by something next week, probably some little tiny fungi growing on a rotting leaf, you know. But I'll get excited about it. Like so. Yes, I'd be interested in if anyone sees this, because it was a few years ago. It's confined to kind of Surrey, Kent, that kind of neck of the woods. We found this in Chester the other day, so it is definitely on the doorstep. Anyone who's got wood chip in their garden has to be slightly warm, not just, you know, so near a greenhouse or in a part of the garden that's not going to get too frosty and things like that. I'd be interested to know if anyone sees it. Nice purple on top of these spots, and the gills underneath look very rusty in colour. Now, there is one species, if you've got twigs and things, mossy twigs and branches in the garden, that you will probably find over the winter period. Scarlet elf cup gets its name because this is what the elves use to drink from in winter. You know, what else are they going to use? And I have a love-hate relationship with this because I absolutely love it because it's a beautiful species. But there's actually two. There's the scarlet elf cup and the ruby elf cup. But most people don't know the other one exists. And people don't realize that to tell them apart, you need to look at them under the microscope. So actually, unless you look at them under the microscope, you can't say it's scarlet elf cup or ruby elf cup. It's just Sarcocipher sp. So the Sarcocipher austriaca, the scarlet elf cup, and Sarcocipher coccinea, the ruby elf cup. And on face value, you can't tell them apart. It's when you look at them under the microscope. And I know some of you here have been on fungi events I've done in the past. And I've said we need to look at that under the microscope to say which one it is. I'll just show you what we mean by that. So the image in the top left there, on the outer side of the cups, they actually have small hairs, which under the microscope in Sarcocypher austriaca, they're curled and coiled. In Sarcocypher coccinea, they're straight. Now, I'd say they're curved and coiled, wouldn't you? So that's Sarcocypher austriaca, the scarlet elf cup. And we can confirm that by looking at the spores. The spores on coccinea are rounded. An austriaca, they've got blunt ends, and that's the spore. You can definitely see it's got blunt ends. The spores aren't actually blue, they're white, but looking at white under the microscope is a pain. So we often use dyes which stain the spores, so then we can look at them a bit more clearly. So that's when, so with some fungi, we do have to look under the microscope, and that's what we're looking for. It doesn't matter, you know, I'm obsessed. I like everything compartmentalized. I want to know what I've seen, when I've seen it, where I've seen it, that kind of thing. Just enjoy it, you know, just, it doesn't matter if it's ruby elf cup or scarlet elf cup. It's a stunning fungus in the middle of winter that the elves used to drink from. What's not to love? You know, we can worry about the minutiae in the future and things like that. But yeah, it's fantastic. We get things like turkey tail out in winter, which is fantastic because research that's been done on the medicinal properties of this are really quite interesting. And if you're interested in kind of medicinal fungi, if you Google turkey tail, then there'll be some interesting articles coming out from the States about using this. You can even buy it from Holland and Barrett. Yet it is statistically our 5th commonest species of fungi that grows in the wild, but incredibly variable. So this is a nice bluey, goldy kind of color version. This is also turkey tail. You know, look at the difference between the two, look very different, but lots of zones of color, always turkey tail shaped and pure white underneath, growing on lots of woody debris around lots and lots of different habitats, including gardens. It's the great thing. I can spend days and days in winter around one log, you know, and I do this. We have a couple of projects on the go called the beech logs. And what we do is we take a fallen beech tree and we monitor it over kind of 5-6 years, what species of fungi occur on it. And I think one we did a number of years ago now, over 5 years, we recorded 83 different types of fungi on one beech tree as it was rotting. Whilst it was alive, it would probably have supported probably the same number again. And they're fantastic. And you get weird things like, because this is the great thing, autumn's very much the mushroom season of fungi, but winter's the fungi side of fungi, the weird stuff like these jellies. This is called Warlock's butter. And then you get things like common eyelash, which if you look round the edge of the red cups, you can see the little hairs, their eyelashes. So you get things like this, all of them doing the job of decomposing this substance, you know, these trees, and including this one. This is cobalt crust. Now, whenever I talk to people about crust fungi, their eyes glaze over and kind of they're not interested in crust fungi in the slightest. But this one's bright cobalt blue, and actually, this is an aerial photograph of kind of, you know, an island in the sea and things like that. That little island is actually ash bark. And the fungus is engulfing the ash tree. Ash is undergoing a huge transformation. So it's under attack from a fungus called ash dieback, and we're going to lose a lot of ash trees. This was the first, you know, ash dieback arrived in the UK 2012. I think 2012, the first case. 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, if you'd said you'd seen it in the Northwest, we wouldn't have really believed it. Now, finding a habitat where ash trees occur that hasn't got ash dieback is now the challenge. You know, that's how quickly this fungus infection has spread right the way through our ash trees, and we're going to lose a lot of them. You know, some estimates 90% of all of our ash trees are going to go. Now, ash is quick at regenerating, and because of the high number of ash trees there are, it's not going to be too catastrophic like Dutch elm disease was. It will be catastrophic for lots of things because lots of species are solely dependent on ash. But this fungus is going to thrive. So as there's more and more ash trees rotting, this is one of its favorite hosts. So all of a sudden, as ash rot, this fungus is going to go, whoop. Then once all the ash is rotted away, that fungus is then going to be like, well, what am I going to go on now? And it's going to go plummet back down and probably become rarer than it was in the first place. But again, people find this in their garden because some people, if you grow broad beans and use hazel sticks or ash sticks and things like that, you often find it on those. Or if you're out in the wood and you see a bit of wood covered in a bright blue fungus, there's only this it could be, really. And it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. We'll finish up now because I've tried to do a whistle-stop tour of winter wildlife in 45 minutes. And as you can tell, there's so much to discuss. But when we come out of winter, you know, and we're talking February now, because I always, when does winter end? I still haven't decided. And when does spring start? I mean, lesser celandine are in flowering on Christmas Day. And I always think of lesser celandine as a bit of a springy plant. Whenever we see crocuses I often think, oh, crocuses are the sign of spring. They're not. It's that fake spring, isn't it? Before real spring happens, you know, you start seeing these snowdrops and crocuses all over the place, and you think spring's round the corner, and it's not. It's like another 6 weeks away. But I often think it's when I start seeing this is the sign of spring, and the birds that start making this nest do it as early as February, so it's still winter. And the birds that make this nest, it takes them 4 weeks, and they spend 4 weeks gathering moss and lichen together and holding it all together with spider's web. And they place them in things like bramble or holly or hawthorn, something that's quite spiky, but also offers kind of structural integrity. They can attach their nest to it. And they build this dome, and then they leave a little hole for the birds to go in and out, and they line the nest. And on average, according to the BTO, they line it with 1,000 white feathers, which if you've ever seen one of these nests, you know, open, you can believe, you know, it's just the most comfy nest you could imagine. And I've missed the picture. It's the nest of this. I'll come back to the other two. It's the nest of this. This is a long-tailed tit. And this nest is amazing. You know, the fact that it's held together with spider's web allows it to expand, because she will lay up to 14 eggs in that nest, tiny little eggs. And then as the youngsters develop and mature, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the kind of long-tailed tits don't often fledge the nest. The nest just kind of disintegrates around the birds to reveal all these long-tailed tits in the nest. And they start building as early as February. It takes them ages, and then they line it, and then they can wait almost a week or two. They wait until the weather's right, then they'll put the eggs in. Whilst they're building the nests, they can be very active, very vocal, and very tolerant. You can get as close as you want. It's only when they have eggs that they'll become very quiet, very wary. And if you see long-tailed tits, February, March, dancing around near bramble, there's no doubt going to be a nest in it. In fact, when you start looking at bramble patches, you often find these kind of balls of licheny moss, and they've increased so much in the last 30, 40 years. And it must be to do, it's certainly in Greater Manchester, with the Clean Air Act, because 40 years ago, the trees weren't covered in lichen. So what would the long-tailed tits have used to make their nest? And then, of course, lots and lots of lichen about now. So then this is what you see building in the nest and things like that. So definite winners. Two last things. I've added these last, so that's why I've mistakenly put them in between the long-tailed tits. Two weird fungi for you to look for in the garden. Well, one in the garden, one if you go to the beach anytime soon. This is the striate earth star. Earth stars are fascinating. If you've got Lelandii in the garden or any conifer, it's always worth a look underneath them, because these earth stars start off like an onion, and then the outer skin folds back and keeps folding back until eventually it forms these legs, and then that lifts this fungus up. And that little top bit is like a puffball. So it's just a sack of spores, which are like the seed. And as it rains on top, it puffs out all the spores. So a mycologist once told me it's an evolutionary advantage, this, because we have puffballs, but they don't have these legs. But the legs of the earth star allow it to get that extra inch off the ground for the spores to spread further. Now, I said if it's an evolutionary advantage, why are Earth stars much rarer than puffballs? To which there's been no reply. But they're fascinating, and they're often in gardens, especially ones with Lelandii. So it's worth a little look in the garden. And on the coast, if you go along the sand dunes and things like that, in the kind of what we'd call the kind of the green dunes, the kind of not on the sand, but where you start getting a bit of vegetation, have a look for the dwarf Earth star, which you can often, the great thing with Earth stars is the cases often last right the way through winter. So even in January, February, you'll still see signs of them, even if they're not at their total best. But this is what they should look like now. So this is the dwarf Earth star. It's tiny. It's growing in amongst wild thyme there, so you can see how small it must be. So there you go. A kind of whistle-stop tour of winter wildlife. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope I've not bored everyone too much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Can I just say as well, that was fascinating. I was glued. Glued to my screen.
Some really, really great photos there and images, and a real inspiration to get us out there and looking. And I am going to look for elf cups at the bottom of the garden. My question is, will I see the elves?
It's a good question. I did a podcast the other day, with Professor Jiggett. I'm not sure if some of the people here will know Professor Jiggett.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And I was asking him he was talking to me about goblins and the difference between elves and goblins and fairies and things like that. And I was absolutely enthralled, and I was asking him about the taxonomy of them. And I was like, what am I doing? This is trying to talk actual science about goblins and things like that. But yeah, it's, I asked him if goblins and fairies and elves are real, why have I never seen them? To which he said, am I looking? I'm too busy looking for fungi to go looking. I'm not looking for goblins. So
yeah,
he said it was my fault. So maybe I need to stake out some scarlet elf cup, and then I'll see the elves one night.
Yeah,
I think you need to be on other mushrooms though to see that, but who knows?
Okay, well, I think we've just got time for a couple of questions. Is that right, Ellie?
Yeah. If I think you said earlier that we would run over ever so slightly. So if you need to leave now, obviously we are recording this, so you can always just come back and watch. And yeah, let's make this an ongoing discussion about getting excited about wildlife in winter. So Hilary, we've got a few questions.
Well, Glenys was asking about the starlings, and she was saying they seem to be declining locally. Is this because they're murmurating? I guess there's a thing, isn't there, at the moment? I've got some starlings in my garden, but we also know there are these big murmurations. So
yeah, so when I saw 1 million starlings, you kind of think, well, they must be doing well. They're not. There's a couple of things to consider. The breeding population in the UK is definitely declining, and the size of murmurations seem to be getting lower. Now, 1 million sounds impressive. 50 years ago, that could have been 5, 6, 7 million. Yeah. So even though it's a big number, it's not as big as it once was. And then these birds that are murmurating here, how far have they come? So we know some of them are coming from Eastern Europe and Russia that are wintering here. So, and sometimes you get murmurations that gather together to form these super flocks, so overall starlings are declining. There's no doubt about it. And it's hard you can't really use murmurations as a kind of how well they're doing. We can just say, there's been a big increase this year in numbers coming in from Eastern Europe. Well, that might be because of the weather. You don't know, but numbers in the UK are definitely down. The thing is you always get whenever we talk about are things declining or increasing, we always use our own reference point as reference. So in my lifetime, starlings have gone down, but if I was double my age before that, they were already halved. And now they might have halved again, so yeah, they're definitely declining. which is a shame. But when you're dealing with big numbers, it can be hard to convince people that they're declining. When you say, I've seen 1 million today,
Yeah.
you think, well, that's nothing to worry about then. But passenger pigeons,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes,
passenger pigeons in America, they were, the skies were black with them.
Yeah.
You can't see one now because they're extinct.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, we can't be too complacent.
No, definitely not. No. Now, Barbara has asked, are there any plans to introduce beavers into the Northwest? Now, I can tell you, Barbara, that they have been introduced by Cheshire Wildlife Trust into Delamere Forest near Hatchmere. So I think that happened about a month or even less ago. There was a public launch, wasn't there?
Yeah.
So exciting.
I mean, if
exciting.
let's say there wasn't, it would be stupid not to. You know, these things are just a free flood defense management plan.
Yeah.
You know, all you need to do is release them and they'll do the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really great news. It'd be brilliant to see how those particular beavers get on. And I think Cheshire Wildlife Trust are going to use them as an example to show land managers and landowners, as you say, what good they can do for the water management. So yeah, that's just brilliant news. Now, Barbara's asked another question about what impact will re-wetting upland peat bogs have on wildlife. I don't know if you want to answer that.
It's a positive thing. So I can take you to parts of, you know, Greater Manchester where the upland kind of peat areas are just dry, they're boring, there's nothing there. You know, literally heather and grouse, and that's it. And the thing is we need to change our perspective of what good landscape looks like. And we're slowly starting to do this because you know, my passion is urban wildlife. I grew up in Greater Manchester, you know, finding wildlife there is important. But if you just imagine these beautiful heather moorlands, you know, like, or you think of quintessentially British, they're just a desert, you know, because they've just got heather and grouse and nothing else, 2 species across a vast area. And the same with green fields. Now, I'm using this term lightly because whenever we think of, you know, rolling green fields with cows on or sheep, we think, oh, that's brilliant, great for wildlife. No, it's not. It's just cows, sheep, and grass, grazed grass. You know, so when people say don't build on greenbelt, build on the brownfield sites, well, in Manchester, some great sites are brownfield sites. You know, places like Wigan Flashes is an old brownfield site. It's an old, you know, kind of colliery thing, isn't it? We don't want anyone to build on that. There's plenty of green fields which are just good enough for horse to graze on, but that's it. Build on that, you know, as a very, very, very loose term. But re-wetting the upland peatlands, yes, in areas it has been done, it's been great because the flora has increased, the insect diversity has increased, and the birds coming back. So places like Dovestones, where this has happened, not only is it good for flood defense, again, by slowing the flow, but also numbers of dunlin, numbers of golden plover, they've increased as well. So it is, as far as from what I've seen, from my personal experience with upland peat bogs, I think it's a positive.
Great, thank you very much. Now, we've got a couple more questions and we'll just finish off with these. Lauren and Lucy, well, Lucy in particular wants to know, what's the best time of day to see an otter?
Dawn and dusk, generally.
Great.
But see, otters, river otters now are nocturnal. Otters are not nocturnal animals. We have made them nocturnal. So if any of you go to the west coast of Scotland, you often see otters on locks on the coast during the day, middle of the day, you know, having your lunch, otter will swim by. And people often think they are sea otters. They're not. Sea otters are something that occur in the Pacific. Very cute, very cuddly, very furry, and often whack clams on their chest and things like that. The sea otters in Scotland and our river otters are the same species. But our river otters were persecuted so much that the only way to survive was for them to become nocturnal. So really, with otters, we document them on rivers using camera traps that can record at night. You have to be very, very lucky to see one during the day. It's not impossible. I mean, reserves like Brockles, they get sightings during the day, you know, but you just need to be very, very lucky. Very, very lucky. I could say go at dawn and you leave at 10 o'clock, and at 10:05 one swims by because it's been disturbed from its holt or whatever. It's just one of those things. If I say look at dawn, it'll be out at dusk. If I say look at midday, it'll be out at 1.
Right. Okay.
Whenever,
well, that's a hint, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Dawn's always best for wildlife, I think, because it's a bit
Yeah.
quieter and you get some of the things that are just about to go to bed and some of the things waking up. I'd say dawn.
Yeah, and dawn is pretty late at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, that's the best thing with winter. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, one more question. This is our final question. Elizabeth's daughter wants to know, what is your number one favourite bird?
If I didn't say crane, the other half would kill me because she works with cranes. But it's a bittern. Bitterns are my favourite because they're just enigmatic, they're beautiful. And whenever you go looking for bitterns, the habitat's always beautiful. Big reed beds, open water, it's ducks, it's waders, it's you know, yeah. And reed beds are just beautiful in winter. That golden colour, and at dusk you get the light through it and it's just glorious and it moves, you know. And it's just one of those things that when you see a bittern, it's a good day. You know, it's because the amount of days that you don't see a bittern are far more numerous. But it is really encouraging because I mean, I said at the start about bitterns, you know, only a handful breeding in the UK when I was a kid. One site we visited down south a couple of years ago had 26 males. That's just one site. You know, they've done so well. So yeah, a bird that I absolutely love. Yes. No, I just saw another question from Lauren Fagan about, is bird flu going to have an effect on birds we're able to see? Simple answer is no. It has massive implications for the poultry industry and where captive birds are kept. But in terms of wild birds, bird flu has always been around in wild populations, but it shouldn't make much of an impact in your day-to-day bird watching. But yes, the other half works with birds in captivity. She's a zookeeper and she works with some incredibly rare birds, and for them it's a massive concern because if they get it, there's some seriously rare birds that, you know, would become even rarer very quickly. So yes. Leslie, my website, discoverthewild.co.uk, there's a resources page and it has the tree ID thing on there, plus the Lancs Wildlife Trust. So mine, Lancs Wildlife Trust, you know, have some spotter sheets that are great for kids. Mine take it a little bit further. So it depends how much you want to go. And the thing is that the next stage is then you need a really good book, you know. But these things help you just, you know, get that basic knowledge and things like that. And trying to condense a whole book into an A4 sheet's difficult. So please forgive me.
Yeah. And probably not the thing to be taking out today in this weather.
No,
but
laminate it.
No, that's true. Thanks so much, Dave. That was really great.
Pleasure.
Really inspiring. Brilliant.
It's a pleasure. If anyone ever has any questions, please feel free to email me. If you've got any questions that we weren't able to ask, if you go onto my website, all the emails come through to me. I'm always happy to chat.
Great.
So thank you all for coming and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And so I've dropped a bunch of links into the comment section as well. So links to Dave's website and Dave's email in case you just have a burning question that you just need to know and you need Dave to respond immediately. Then you could email him or visit his website. I've also dropped a link to our website where you can keep up with our latest events, find out how to support us and find out how to volunteer with us as well. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much, everyone. I don't think we've got another digital event planned until next year now, which is very exciting. So Hillary's saying few. Okay. But yes, we will be back and I really hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Yeah, and thanks again, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
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 Thank you.